លោកនាងទស្សនិកជនជាទីមេត្រីនៅពេលនេះយើងសូមជូនកម្មវិធី Idea Talk នៃសារព័ត៌មានទៅ Cambodia Daily ហើយរាត្រីនេះវាគ្មិនរបស់យើងមានលោក Brad Adams លោកជានាយកអង្គការមួយឈ្មោះថាអង្គការសិទ្ធិនាយកអង្គការសិទ្ធិបរិស្ថានអន្តរជាតិនិងកញ្ញាសិនទេវីនាយិកាអង្គការខេមរៈសង្គ្រោះឬសង្គ្រោះកម្ពុជា Founder of Safe Cambodia លោក Brad Adams លោកជា Director Climate Rights International ហៅកាត់ថា CRI បាទប្រធានបទនៅថ្ងៃនេះយើងនិយាយអំពីឥទ្ធិពលនៃសម្ពាធអន្តរជាតិមកលើប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក្រោយការបោះឆ្នោត Impact of International Pressure for Post-Election Cambodia ប្រសិនបើលោកអ្នកនាងមានសំណួរឬយោបល់សូមសរសេរនៅក្នុងប្រអប់ comment ខាងក្រោមនៃការផ្សាយរបស់យើងតាមអាស័យដ្ឋាន www.facebook.com/withoutfearorfavorkh I'd like to say good morning to Brad. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you again. Long time.
Nice to see you, Brad. All right. Welcome to our program. Tevi, good morning to you too. Tevi? Tevi, would you please unmute your...
Yes. Good morning.
Right.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having us.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to welcome both of you to our program this morning, 9:30 Eastern Time and 8:30 in Cambodia time. Before I ask question, I'd like to highlight the fact that the government claimed nearly 100% of eligible voters went to the polls to elect their new 5-year term members of the Constitutional Assembly. The CPP, a sure winner in the one-horse race, took almost all 125 seats. The royalist Hun Sen somehow managed to win 5 seats. However, observers call the election unfree and unfair because of the absence of the largest opposition party, the Cambodia Rescue Party and the Candlelight Party. Now that the election is over, Brad, what kind of international pressure may be brought to bear in Cambodia, and what impact would it be like?
There's no democracy in the world that takes this election seriously. The election was a selection, not an election. It was a piece of political theater. It only happened because the Constitution requires it to happen every 5 years.
Yeah.
There was no real contest, and nobody would consider this a legitimate election or a legitimate government that comes out of it. One thing I should say is that a lot of people think because an election is not legitimate, that there will be a question at the United Nations about whether or not that new government can take up the seat of that country, and that won't happen. There will be no attempt to stop Cambodia from sitting in its seat. That is reserved for different kinds of situations, such as the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. But there will be a very strong reaction from lawmakers in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, and throughout the European Union, and some other places like Australia. This election and the decision by Hun Sen to hand over to his son and create a dynasty will lead many people to reconsider what they can do. And I think we have a few things that should be considered. First, the Cambodia Democracy and Human Rights Act in the U.S. Congress has been sitting around gathering dust for a couple of years. It should be passed immediately, and its provisions should be implemented. And among the most important provisions that can be implemented through that act and otherwise are sanctions against serious human rights abusers inside Cambodia, including Hun Sen himself.
Yeah.
It should be made clear by all democracies that Hun Sen will receive no further invitations to travel. It was hard for some governments to show courage and not invite Hun Sen to visit their countries. So he went repeatedly to places like Japan and France. But he even was invited by the U.S. as part of ASEAN under the Obama administration. And that should end. Hun Sen should be completely isolated. His bank accounts should be seized because they are full of corrupt assets, as should those of other senior leaders. And then one other thing that I think is really important is for the European Union to get serious about the EBA program. a few years ago, it cut Cambodia's quota inside the European Union by 20%. And Hun Sen really kind of laughed at that. And I think it's understandably laughed at that because a 20% cut was not a serious response to such a long process that came to the conclusion that Cambodia was not meeting any of its human rights obligations.
Right.
And the European Union should just follow European Union law and drop this preferred access to its market. So there's a lot of things that countries can do and should do. And I think the fact that this election was a sham and that Hun Sen is now turning over his office, he's not turning over power, but he's stepping down from his office, is a really good moment for governments to start doing the right thing.
Okay. All right. Pavy, what is your thought on this question?
Well, right now, this is an opportunity for the Khmer community as a whole to stand against it or to voice their concerns to the international community, especially with all of the points that Brad mentioned, including like economic sanctions. I mean, this is a time where the Khmer community can reach out to the member states and can reach out to these different governments and state that they want to increase the EBA from 20% to 50%. I know, Brad, you mentioned 100%, but just so that, or even writing letters to, especially with the UPR coming up, this is a time where the Cambodian community needs to also be involved in these types of international forums to speak out against this election or selection.
What should they do? I mean, with regard to the UPR, travel to Geneva?
No, this is where they can send in their. No, this is where they can send in their submissions, their complaints. That's due in September 23rd.
Okay, in September. All right. What else the Cambodian community in the U.S. can do here with their respective representatives? Writing letters?
There's a lot more. Yes, they write more with letters. So they can select specific member states that have shown interest in Cambodia. So, for example, like France or Japan, the United States. These are different types of governments that the Cambodian community can and should be reaching out to these different member states to tell them that they're going to be part of the UPR process, to tell them that what they are requesting, to tell them that what they demand, such as the bill, to pass the bill, or
Okay.
Brad, did you want to add?
Right. Okay, thank you. Most Cambodian people expect the international community, at least as far as I know, to rescue them from Hun Sen's autocratic rule. Yet they voted overwhelmingly for the ruling party. Brad, what does that tell you?
They didn't vote overwhelmingly. They didn't vote overwhelmingly for the ruling party. We have no idea what Cambodians really think because we haven't had a real election in Cambodia since, at least 2013, which was a very flawed election itself, in which I'm sure that the opposition actually won if it had been an actually free and honest election.
Right.
So we can completely discount whatever numbers that the Cambodian authorities made up and published. They don't matter. They're meaningless. They're fake. So to your main question, though, should Cambodians expect the international community to come and save them? I think the answer is yes and no. The international community has an obligation to Cambodia. I mean, without going through a long historical discourse here, Cambodia in the 1960s was a neutral country at peace. And it's only what's happened from external forces that brought Cambodia into war, brought the Khmer Rouge, the Vietnamese occupation, UNTAC, and many countries, the United States, China, Vietnam, Soviet Union, have a very serious obligation to Cambodia. And the Paris agreements outlined that 18 countries signed an international treaty saying that Cambodia would have a democracy and full respect for human rights. That's why my old office, the one I used to work at, the United Nations Human Rights Office in Cambodia, was created. It was part of that deal. And it's still there because of the long history of human rights abuses in Cambodia. So there is an international obligation. And look, I don't think the Paris peace agreements are still operable. I don't think any country is going to say, oh, yeah, we still have an obligation, a legal obligation under the Paris agreements. They'll say we discharged that during UNTAC, but they have a moral obligation. They've also signed, just like Cambodia, international human rights law treaties. And so they have an obligation to implement them. And they have an obligation to do right by the Cambodian people, because Cambodia still has not ever had a democracy post Khmer Rouge. There have been close calls with a real election, but we've never had one where the winner was able to take power when it was the opposition, such as during UNTAC. So, yes, we should call the international community, but I think your question is basically asking, what should Cambodians be doing for themselves too? And I think that's important, not just to expect the international community to come in and save Cambodia, because we've seen that's not going to happen by itself. It has to be both. It has to be both international pressure and pressure from Cambodians. Cambodians inside Cambodia have to make very difficult decisions about what to do and not to do, because sometimes political activity is permitted in Cambodia, although it's always risky. But other times it leads directly to a prison sentence. So the main Cambodian voices, at least for now, are likely to come from outside. And that's why Save Cambodia is so important. And that's why other Cambodian organizations, members of the diaspora, whether they're involved in politics directly or not, are really important and have to mobilize. And I want to emphasize, I think this is a real opportunity. This fake election has reminded people about Cambodia's long-standing dictatorship, one-party rule. All major media are covering it around the world. And now we have Hun Sen saying he's going to step aside from his position. Of course, he did say, I will still control politics. He's very honest about what he's going to do as leader of the CPP and in his future role in the Senate. But it creates an opportunity, and the Cambodian community should take Tavy's advice and get as active as possible in writing letters and seeking meetings. I can tell you that State Department officials, European Union officials, UK officials have told me that when they hear directly from Cambodians or other people in other countries facing dictatorship, it matters to them. It makes a difference. It's different than when they hear from someone like me. They take what I say seriously, but they care about what people from that country think.
Okay. All right. Believe it or not, the Khmer think otherwise. They think that the State Department would listen to you more than listen to the Khmer people. Okay. Now I get that.
Both. It's not either or. It's definitely both.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Tavy, you've heard what Brad has described. In this scenario, how can they bring about a change for the better to their country? They, meaning the Khmer, the Cambodian.
I think that Khmer people need to, and I'm Khmer, right? So I can say this. I think that we need to stop looking at ourselves as the victim. And we need to realize that we actually have a lot more power than we think. And I think if we start to change that mindset, like stop asking, what or when can the international community help, but rather than utilizing the energy to demand or to tell, to reach out directly to those different key policymakers and to tell them what exactly that you want. How do you foresee Cambodia? How do you envision it? And how do you want to design it and go after it? Then it's a very different, you receive different outcomes. And that's what, especially the people that I've been working with, the Khmer community for the last few years, it was very difficult to break in with this type of mindset, because as you know, that is a common question that they have. What can they do? But when they started to take that initiative themselves, started to really see things grow. They really start to see that the international community really started to respond to them differently. as almost like working with them and really listening, like what Brad said, they really do listen to what it is that you are asking for and being very specific and strategic in those requests as well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Last week, I discussed this similar topic with attorney Morton Sklar. He suggested that the Khmer people should do more and take different steps. Brad, can you share your thought? Can you tell them what exactly they must do from now on if they want to see a real change in their country?
Well, one thing I'd love to see in this next week is an op-ed.
Okay.
Sorry?
Yeah, you said next week. Okay.
Yeah, sometime in this next week, because this is when people are paying attention to Cambodia. I'd like to see an op-ed with a Cambodian name as the author in every major democracy, talking about the situation in Cambodia and what that country can do. So something in Australia, something in France, something in the UK, something in Canada, the United States, Japan, South Korea. You know, every country that has some, Thailand, of course, Indonesia, Malaysia. Yeah. This kind of public commentary is really important. And actually, a lot of major news organizations now prefer to get op-eds from people from that country than people like me. Okay. So it used to be really easy for me to place an op-ed in the Washington Post or New York Times. And now one question I have is there a Cambodian who you think could write the same kind of piece? So I think that would be important. It's a good sign of widespread interest. I think letter writing, like Tavia is saying, joint letters are quite useful, but individual letters are also really important. Okay. And they should not say, "Oh, please save Cambodia." That is not going to impress anybody. They should have a very clear list of policy recommendations. The governments who receive these letters will know the situation in Cambodia is bad. They know it's a one-party state. They know these were fake elections. They're going to be thinking to themselves, what can or should we do? And it would be very important for these kinds of letters to come across as thoughtful and sophisticated. And to Tavi's point, not begging them to be to save the country, but telling them that, you know, you are a democracy, you have signed up to international human rights standards. We expect you to do the following things.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brad. That's a good idea. That's why we have you here today. A few senators last week successfully inserted an amendment to fiscal year 2024 Foreign Operations Bill, conditions foreign assistance on the release of Thierry Seng and other prisoners of conscience. Amendment to Section 7031C bans entry visa on officials from the Royal Government of Cambodia. Tavi, has your group been supportive of it, and other bills such as the S-831, known as the Transnational Repression Policy Act?
Yes, before I answer that, I do want to mention to tag onto what Brad said about the letter writing. In the next several weeks, our group is going to be running meetings to prepare for like letter writing parties in the community, so that respective leaders in their communities can also reach out to us, and we will provide very specific templates to help guide them in how to write and the different addresses that they should and can be connecting to, that they should really be sending these letters to. So if they are encourage this, and if they are interested in being a part of this party, this letter writing, please contact us. And I can give the email at the end. But to answer your question, we've never worked on the bill before, but we do plan on working on it now. This is simply because we were more focused on reaching out to at more of the international level, and then kind of coming downward. So this is something, yes, that we are working now.
Okay. That's great. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Tavi?
No.
No. Okay. The CPP has spread.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're right. It was the transnational repression. Yes. This is very, very new, and this was brought to my attention about some of the in our community. There are threats taking place here in the United States. So we did promise on the 16th of July in Long Beach that our group would help to create kind of like a hotline or a place where the community can feel safe to report their threats or their concerns, and we can work with them regarding this serious situation.
Okay, so S831 and also Brad just mentioned the Cambodia Democracy Act should be resuscitated, I would say, for a lack of a better term. Okay, the CPP has spread its wing using its ill-gotten wealth to set up youth networks in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Thailand. In the U.S., its party youth wing, directed by Hun Manet from the Central Committee, has divided the United States in regions, North, South, East, West, Central, and recruited U.S. citizens to support the ruling party. Brad, what can the Khmer community here in the United States do to counter its influence?
Well, I mean, this is really pretty simple in that that structure that's been set up, which is probably at the advice of China, I'm not sure, but the Chinese have been doing this for years in the United States. It sounds very much like what China is doing, and they probably advised the Cambodian government to do this. That group is not motivated by love of the ruling party of the CPP or Hun Sen. It's motivated by self-interest.
Yeah,
there's money changing hands. There's favors being exchanged. There's business opportunities that are available inside Cambodia for people who get deeply involved. And on the other side is most Cambodians who are living in the United States, most Cambodian Americans, are completely opposed to one-party rule in Cambodia. So, basically, you can outnumber them, but it requires organization. It requires working together. It requires moving past old rivalries. It's very, very disappointing to me to see still in the Cambodian American community or in the Cambodian diaspora globally, still too much infighting, too much positioning for power that doesn't really exist. Because, by the way, when you're out of power or living overseas, you don't really have any power. So what are you fighting over when you're fighting? No, there's no point to it. You save that for when you get back home.
Fighting along party line.
Party lines, personal lines, old, I'm older, I have more, right to talk than a younger person. And by the way, it's really important to get younger people involved. I did speak at the July 16th event that Tavi organized in Long Beach.
Yeah.
And it was my honor to speak there, but there were very few young people in the audience. And it's very important that younger people are welcomed in, are invited in, welcomed in, and then empowered. Not treated as young people, but treated as equals. But also, when there are cases of intimidation or violence, they need to be reported to the police. Just yesterday, a Burmese national was convicted in New York of threatening a Burmese diplomat and is going to receive a significant prison sentence. And it was very important that those threats that were made, and it looks like it was maybe an assassination plot, but at least a plot to physically harm him. That shut down not just this particular case, but it sounds like a whole group of Burmese who were doing, I think, similar things to what I heard in Long Beach people saying was happening in the Cambodian community, where people were receiving threats. And where the CPP is trying to extend its reach outside of the Cambodian borders into the United States. U.S. law enforcement authorities will take that very seriously if these incidents are reported.
Right. Okay. That's why one other step is that we should support the Senate bill S831. You told the Cambodia Daily a couple of weeks ago, on July 16, I believe, in California, our colleague, Dang Sarada, that Hun Sen cannot transfer his power to Hun Manet. And now Hun Sen said he is going to give his son the power, the office, I guess, on August 22nd. So what is your thought about that now?
Yeah, he's still not transferring power. He said, the quote I read was, "I will still control politics." So I think what he's basically saying is, I don't want to have a full-time job anymore. I want to have a part-time job.
Right.
But in my part-time job, I'm still going to have exactly the same salary and benefits and the same power as I used to. I think I'd love that, by the way. We all would love to get a part-time job instead of the full-time job we have with the same salary and power. He's still going to run the country, and he's just going to do it from a different place. And he's going to use his puppet, his son.
Yeah.
And Hun Sen's going to pull the strings. He's going to tell him whether to turn left or turn right, whether to say it's daytime or nighttime. And it will be interesting to see over time whether Hun Manet outgrows that, or whether he will continue to salute his father and do whatever Hun Sen says. But in the short term, I don't expect there to be any significant change. I mean, I do expect Hun Manet to be less disgusting in public. I mean, Hun Sen is a truly horrible, disgusting human being in so many ways. Yeah. But including in how he talks, he's incredibly rude, threatens people, threatens governments. He curses. My guess is Hun Manet will come across as more of a businessman kind of personality, and things will appear calmer. If that can translate into policy and into government behavior, if it means there'll be fewer killings, that the police will be restrained, that the army and the gendarmerie will be restrained, there'll be fewer land grabs, etc., that would be great. But I don't think we have any reason to expect that. Hun Manet has not signaled in any way that he disagrees with anything his father has ever done.
Right. Okay. All right, Brad. My other question is, the United States has done, taken a few steps, extra steps, to try to show autocrats around the world, including Hun Sen in Cambodia, that if you don't do this, you keep doing the same thing over and over, violating all the norms and human rights and democracy, you will get punished. Now, do you think the United States is going to punish these autocrats the way they talk, or a lot less?
Well, the Transnational Crime Act that you talked about, if it just stops at visa denials, it's not going to make a big difference. What the U.S. has to do to go after dictatorial and corrupt leaders is to go after their money, because almost all of them have significant assets that were obtained through corruption, parked in banks around the world.
Right.
There has been a move at greater transparency among banks. There's a lot of moves at the level of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, the OECD, which is based in Europe.
Yeah.
I've had discussions for years about more transparency so that criminals can't hide their assets, and these people who these dictators are criminals.
Right.
And so I would like to see that law include very clear provisions on the U.S. government's obligation to identify and seize illegally obtained assets. Of course, people accused at that point should have due process and be able to show that their assets were legally obtained.
Right.
But I don't think any very, very wealthy Cambodian could possibly make that case, because it has simply been impossible in Cambodia to become someone who has $100 million or more, and there are many Cambodians now who have that kind of money, without being involved systematically in corrupt activities. Simply because the Cambodian economy isn't big enough to create that kind of wealth on its own. So that's what they have to do, and the question is, will they do it? And that's where Cambodian letter writers and and advocates can make a difference. Talk to your elected officials, write to the State Department, write to the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
Tell them why this is important.
Okay. But don't you think when it comes to freezing assets, money, bank account, things like that, we have the Magnitsky Act, accountability or Global Magnitsky Act, that would take care of the account, freezing, right?
I wish it were doing that. I can tell you that we published the Dirty Dozen report at Human Rights Watch.
Right. I've seen that.
Yeah, and
Human Rights Watch.
We expected that, based on what U.S. government officials told us, that almost all of those people would be sanctioned, including their assets. And we're finding that what happens is that even if the State Department is in favor, the Treasury Department moves very, very, very slowly. And sometimes I think that they just don't care. I think a lot of U.S. Treasury officials don't know where Cambodia is on a map, because a lot of Americans aren't very internationally focused.
Right.
And so they're not under any pressure, and so they prioritize other things. So this is a kind of a conversation about how government works and fails. But what we need is a clearer policy direction from the White House, from the State Department, about using the Magnitsky Law. But also, I think there needs to be more clarity in the law about what the obligations are of the United States government. Not just that it's an option to do this, but it's an obligation.
Okay. Before I turn to Tavi, I'd like to follow up one question with you, Brad. From your experience in Cambodia, an old hand in Cambodia, what are the embassy staff, diplomats in Cambodia doing?
Well, you have a variety. I mean, my experience has been that the tragedy has been that we've never had all the embassies and all the ambassadors on the same page at the same time. In other words, there are always some ambassadors and some diplomats who are doing a lot for the Cambodian activist community, working for democracy, supporting a free and independent media, while there are others who are simply trying to curry favor with Hun Sen and the leadership of the government. There's a term that diplomats use. It's called localitis. So some kind of disease has the word itis at the end, like hepatitis. Localitis is a disease when diplomats decide that they are local political actors and want to be popular locally, when that is not their job. The job of a diplomat is to represent their country's interests, and in Cambodia, those interests largely are about democracy and human rights, since there's a very modest amount of economic and security issues in Cambodia. There's another itis called client-itis. So when the diplomats sometimes think that the leader of the host government is their client. And we've seen that. We saw that in the 1990s with the coup, where a number of diplomats, Ken Quinn, the U.S. ambassador,
I remember that quite well.
Ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, Gordon Longmire, the Australian ambassador, Tony Kevin, all of whom knew that Hun Sen was a violent, murderous person. They all said that to me.
Yeah.
But after the coup, they decided to defend what they saw as their client, the Cambodian leader, instead of the Cambodian people, because they had concluded that the strong man was going to win, and it was in their country's interests to defend the strong man. So to answer your question, it's a mixed picture. There have been some very brave, strong ambassadors. William Todd, the U.S. ambassador in 2013, worked very hard to bring Sam Rainsy back before the election, and he succeeded.
Right.
And Hun Sen, as you know, attacked William Todd all the time.
Right.
But most of the time, we've had very weak diplomacy inside Cambodia, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. The last question, not last, but okay. This question is from our, viewer. China's President Xi Jinping applauded Hun Sen's victory and vowed to continue close cooperation, support. What would happen to the Khmer people, to the people, the benefit of the Khmer people, if China is really, deeply continuing to support the regime, or even Hun Manet, his son?
Is this for me or for Tavi?
Yeah, please, Brad, for you.
Look, I mean, China is a very negative influence in Cambodia, and it controls much of the economy. Hun Sen has given Chinese investors a green light to operate wherever they want, almost. Occasionally, some Chinese company goes too far, it makes the news, and the Cambodian authorities slap their wrists or even occasionally arrest them for bad behavior. But there are people who believe that Cambodia is becoming an economic province of China. And in parts of the country like Sihanoukville, I think that's probably a fair, and Kokong, that's a fair way of putting it. It's causing a lot of resentment in Cambodia among Cambodians. It's also the same in other countries around Southeast Asia. One of the reasons that people in Burma have risen up time and again against their leadership is because China has too big a footprint in the country. But I mean, of course, Xi Jinping applauded the fake election of Hun Sen and the CPP because China doesn't even have elections. China doesn't value elections. It doesn't want democracies in the region. It's quite hostile to democracies in the region because it sees democracies close to China as a threat to the Chinese leadership. Let's remember that it was, I think, in 2012 when Cambodia was the chair of ASEAN that Hun Sen made a break with Vietnam. And sided with China over the South China Sea, and that provoked real anger from Vietnam and other members of ASEAN. And that relationship has been closer and closer ever since. Hun Sen has basically said, China has my back, China will protect me and my leadership, and in exchange, I will do what they want. And so Cambodia is an automatic vote for anything that China wants at the United Nations, for example. And so that relationship is, in my mind, extremely negative for Cambodia. And any sensible government in Phnom Penh would want to broaden the relationships to not be so dependent on one country, because at some point China can decide to drop Cambodia, or it can move on and think it's not a priority. It can pull its investments and destabilize the Cambodian economy. So Hun Sen has basically handed over a lot of sovereignty to China, economic sovereignty, and of course there's the dispute about the military base. In exchange for a promise to support his continuation in power.
Okay. All right, Tavi, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. We have heard, tough talks about punishing autocrats like Hun Sen and others for violating human rights and, destroying democracy. Don't you think talks are just talks and may become double talks? Tavi?
You're asking me, what do I think about talks?
Yeah. Okay. The United States has come out strongly, rebuking the election results and things like that. And we have heard about, legislations and maybe executive orders banning entry visa or something like that, or trying to find some, hidden assets from these people. But then it's talk. And we haven't seen, really action as much. So my question is, we've heard about tough talks, about punishing autocrats like Hun Sen and other people for violating human rights and destroying democracy. So don't you think talks are just talks and maybe double talks at times?
I think that it's, first, I think not only one of the things that our community needs to work on is understanding diplomatic language. So sometimes if we don't hear things in the way in how we want to hear it, we think that it's dumb and then we throw it away, right? But it's not. Sometimes when these statements come out, it is an opportunity. It is an open door that they're providing us to walk towards. So even though, we have to understand, this is how I look at things. I look at things as we're lucky that they're offering opportunity for us. and that it is our duty to go after it. So they talk, but if we're not going to demand it, we're not going to follow through with it, it's also not their fault. It's our fault. And we really need to take initiative to take that talk to the next level.
Okay. So, all right, to just not keep the talking. So we have to move beyond that. Okay, Brad just mentioned that there are diplomats working at our embassy in Cambodia. Some of them, try to be helpful to the activists, environmental activists, human rights activists, political activists. There's some diplomats who perhaps try to curry favor with the ruling elite. So we know all that. So they are not the same. Okay. Cambodia is not really in their, focus land as much. Brad, we talked to attorney Morton Scholar last week, reminded us not to rely too much on our government here in the United States. Do you think the Biden administration may alter policy course toward Cambodia this time around after the election? Or you think it's business as usual when the dust settles?
Well, I'll tell you what my fear is. My fear is that they're going to see Hun Manet being named as prime minister as a false dawn. They're going to see it as a new dawn. And I think, of course, it's a false dawn because he's simply going to do what his father says. Right. And they're going to be telling people, give him time. Let's see what he does. But they should remember what Hun Sen said, I will still control politics. So I think we're going to see a split. I think the current U.S. ambassador, Patrick Murphy, is very soft. Yeah. I would not expect him to come out strong after this election. He has told me years ago that the U.S. just had to work with Hun Sen because he was in power. This is before he was ambassador.
Okay.
Yet I think there will be members of Congress and there'll be other smarter people in the State Department who will see that this is actually a good opportunity to press Cambodia because things are going to change over time in Cambodia. And Cambodia has embarrassed itself now in 2 consecutive electoral exercises by having fake elections with no opposition, no independent media on the ground, right. And a rubber stamp parliament that results. So I think what Tavi is saying is right. I mean, it's up to all of us to push the Biden administration to take advantage of this opportunity in this moment, right, to review its policy and strengthen it, because what they've been doing over all these years of basically issuing what you said earlier, kind of double talk statements, on the one hand sounding tough, on the other hand not acting, has had almost no impact. And so the question is for them, how much do you care about Cambodia? That's the question I ask them. Right. And I think it's a fair question to ask, given the United States' long historical responsibility for what has happened in Cambodia. And what are you going to do differently so that we don't have the same outcome?
Okay. All right. Other question. Hun Sen pledged to transfer, or give off his office, his government to his son. So his son is going to become the head of government. Whether he has power or not, we don't know. In that case, will Hun Sen lose his immunity, and can the French court, arrest him?
So he also, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, has said that he would become the president of the Senate. And I think if he becomes a senator, I think he will claim diplomatic immunity. Okay. That will be up to the French government to whether they respect the position of a senator in Cambodia, which is an undemocratic position. Right. and would allow Hun Sen to travel on a diplomatic passport. I think, as you know, I testified in that case in Paris a number of years ago now.
Right.
And the case was brought by Sam Ranzi for the March 30, 1997 grenade attack, which killed 16 people.
Right.
Across from the National Assembly building at the time.
Yes.
And the judge made very clear findings that Hing Bun-hing was responsible and that he had acted on orders from Hun Sen. And so therefore Hun Sen was responsible. And they've offered to give Hun Sen his day in court. And Hun Sen often threatens lawsuits, and in some cases has had the Cambodian government file lawsuits. But he has, of course, not agreed to show up in Paris and contest the allegations because he knows exactly what happened on that day, that he ordered a plot to kill the leader of the opposition, and instead killed many other people. So the French government, after receiving the decision of the judge in Paris, delayed for a couple of years passing on the arrest warrant for Hing Bun-hing and Hun Sen through the French embassy in Phnom Penh. This is what I was saying earlier. Some diplomats think their job is to protect the local host government.
Right.
And finally, the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France agreed to give Hing Bun-hing the arrest warrant and the findings of the court. Hing Bun-hing has ignored that. But they refused actually to give it to Hun Sen because they said he had diplomatic immunity as head of government. So now that he's not head of government, to get back to your question, he should be available for passing this summons, this arrest warrant, from the French embassy to him in Phnom Penh. And then, of course, he will only be subject to the jurisdiction of the French authorities if he ever enters the European Union territory. And of course, that should be one of those things that the Cambodian community is asking in the letters we're talking about, or the op-eds we're talking about writing. They should be approaching the French authorities and saying, look, on August 22, when Hun Sen is no longer prime minister, no longer head of government, we want your embassy to serve that arrest warrant that they served on Hing Bun-hing, and also make it known publicly that they have done so.
Okay, one last question for Brad, okay, from our viewer. Will Cambodia be one step into North Korea, like, the form of government, dictatorship in the future, Brad?
No, there's no chance of that. There's no reason to think that. I mean, it's sort of like when people say, oh, the Khmer Rouge are coming back, or Hun Sen is the Khmer Rouge. Well, of course, he was a member of the Khmer Rouge, but this is not the Khmer Rouge regime. This is not the North Korean regime. This is a modern, corrupt kleptocracy.
Kleptocracy.
Yeah, that's empowered because they're afraid of losing their money and privilege and wealth, because they have access and control over the army and police. There are lots of governments around the world, unfortunately, that are a dictatorship like Cambodia. Cambodia, in my view, is one of the worst, but North Korea is a whole different level, and I would not compare it to North Korea.
Okay, all right. Let's hope that Cambodia will not head that direction. Okay, Tavi, one last appeal. I would like you to share your thought, your experience, and your appeal to the Khmer community, the Khmer diaspora around the world. What would you like to see them do?
I have been told a lot that the Khmer community has lost a lot of hope, but they should. No. I've been told that a lot of the Khmer community has lost hope, and I would like to tell them that there's no need to lose hope, because they have barely No, I mean, realistically, there's so much opportunity that they also have not have touched, have explored. So this is, in my opinion, really a great time for the community to mobilize together from all different countries and from different groups, especially with our community in country that are very limited to or restricted almost to being able to voice their concerns and opinions. So it's very critical now that we are also being that voice for them and we are advocating on their behalf. So I would say now this is a good time for us to work together, and there's many open doors. We need to look at that as a positive thing, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But also, I mentioned that at the end of this, I want to give the contact for them who want to get involved and that wants to mobilize their community to be part of this international effort that we are doing, or even if they want to reach out to congressmen and senators here in the U.S., be a part of the UN, to email us at hello@savecambodia.org.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Tavi, thank you very much for your time. And Brad, thank you very much for sharing your thought, your experience with us. And we love to have you back at some point. And I remember your recommendation that you want to see perhaps in the next week or so some new action taken by the Khmer community representatives or leaders around the country or abroad. For now, I thank you and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tavi. អរគុណច្រើន
Take care.
Welcome.
Thank you.